In the dark, dank depths of one of America's most infamous prisons, a man sits hunched over a table in solitary confinement, his eyes hollowed out, vacant and soulless, his skin stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. His name is Samuel Little, a man who has been labeled the most prolific serial killer in American history. With a crooked grin and a raspy voice, Little once told FBI officials that he had murdered at least 93 people, perhaps even more than 150, and while authorities have confirmed around 50 victims, they believe there are many more yet to be identified. But how did this monster come to be? How did he grow up to be America's most prolific serial killer? Let's find out. Born in Reynolds, Georgia on June 9, 1940, Samuel Little grew up in poverty. His parents, Samuel and Odessa Little, were sharecroppers, poor African Americans who rented a small shack near the town. Life was tough for them and there wasn't much food to go around, so it fell upon young Samuel to hunt and trap animals to feed the family. This was also where his affinity for weapons started. He would often use a slingshot to hunt small game, and when he turned 12, he received an air rifle from his father, which he used to shoot birds and squirrels. It was during these hunts that Little developed his hunter mentality. He would stalk his prey, lying in wait before pouncing. Years later, he would use the same mentality to hunt down his victims. Little didn't fit in well with the other kids. He was lanky, pale-skinned with red hair, freckles, and blue eyes. Because of his unusual looks, he was bullied throughout school, eventually dropping out in the 9th grade. His mother was deeply religious and believed that her son was possessed by demons, making him even more alienated and angry. In fact, when Little was just 8 years old, he tried to kill her by hitting her over the head with a hammer after she chastised him for stealing food. As a teenager, Little stole cars and had several brushes with the law. By the time he was 17, his criminal record included burglary, assault, and battery, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Then, on March 13, 1956, Little committed an armed robbery and spent the next 2 years in jail awaiting trial. After being released, Little ran away from home to avoid prosecution and assumed a false identity, becoming something of a drifter. He worked odd jobs wherever he could find them, but soon found himself back behind bars, charged with burglary. Little was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but was released in December 1962 after serving just 6 years. It was around this time that Little married a woman named Patricia Mount, but the relationship was turbulent. On November 18, 1964, he punched Patricia in the face, breaking her nose, and was arrested for domestic violence. In February 1965, Patricia filed for divorce and was granted custody of their 2 children. Once again, Little found himself homeless, drifting from city to city, working whatever job he could to stay alive. But with his violent past, it was hard to keep a job or maintain a relationship. So Little reverted to petty crime, eventually getting arrested for car theft. He was sentenced to 5 years, but was released early in December 1967. In the following years, Little led a rather nomadic lifestyle, staying on the road and avoiding any kind of commitment. But despite his efforts to hide his past, he kept getting arrested for minor offenses, which often landed him back in prison. Between 1970 and 1974, Little served time in California state prisons for burglary, rape, and kidnapping. And it was while in prison that Little met a counselor named Robert Kedgel. Kedgel became Little's friend and confidant, helping him adjust to life outside prison walls. But unbeknownst to Kedgel, Little had no intention of changing his ways. While Kedgel helped Little get a job and a place to live, it was all a ruse. Little was still a criminal at heart. He used the apartment Kedgel helped him get as a base of operations, robbing people in the surrounding area. When Kedgel discovered what Little was doing, he confronted him and asked him to move out. But Little refused, saying that he wasn't going anywhere. Kedgel then called the police and Little was arrested. He was charged with burglary, but the case was dismissed in August 1975 due to insufficient evidence. In the following years, Little continued his life of petty crime until he got married again, this time to a woman named Mary Sue Kitson in 1982. The couple moved to Florida, and Little began attending church and even sang in the choir, but he was hiding a dark secret. The very same year he married Mary, he murdered his first victim, a 24-year-old prostitute named Audrey Davin. Little strangled Davin to death and then dumped her body in a wooded area. A few days later, her body was found by a man walking his dog, and police began investigating, but Little was never caught. In the coming years, Little would continue killing women and disposing of their bodies in secluded areas, always choosing victims that he believed wouldn't be missed. In 1994 alone, Little confessed to murdering 7 women. But despite the frequency of his crimes, it would take nearly 20 more years for authorities to link all of the murders together. In total, Little confessed to killing 93 people, with most of his victims being African American women between the ages of 21 and 35. Little often targeted vulnerable women who were involved in prostitution or had a history of drug abuse, believing that they were unlikely to be missed. Most of his attacks happened in Texas, California, Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee. However, he claimed that he killed people in 18 different states and in Mexico as well. Little was finally caught in 2012 when DNA testing linked him to the murder of a woman named Christina Morris. He was arrested and charged with capital murder, and in 2014, Little was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In the years since, he has become one of America's most prolific serial killers, only surpassed by Gary Ridgway, who has been convicted of at least 49 murders. As for Little, he died in prison on September 30, 2020. At the age of 80, his body was cremated and his remains were scattered at sea. Now, while the case against Little was mostly circumstantial, there were a few key pieces of evidence that helped convict him. First, Little was known to be a violent person. He had a history of arrests for assault and battery, as well as for domestic violence. Second, Little had a motive for killing the women. He said that he was targeting women who he believed wouldn't be missed, such as prostitutes and drug addicts. Finally, there were witnesses who saw Little with some of the victims before they disappeared. In addition, Little's DNA was found at some of the crime scenes. Despite all this evidence, many people still question whether or not Little was truly the prolific killer he claimed to be. Considering the fact that authorities have only confirmed about 50 of his victims, it's possible that Little may have gotten away with murder on many more occasions. What do you think? Was Samuel Little truly the most prolific serial killer in American history? Or is there someone else who deserves that title? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our other videos on notorious serial killers. Thanks for watching.